Thank you so much for joining us. I think we have a panel with maybe the broadest possible topic range, looking at the range of potential threats to both our military and civilian infrastructure across environmental threats, cyber threats, physical threats, and of course, ensuring that we can maintain the safety and security of those critical assets. I'm really excited to be joined by this panel here today because I think we cover, I'm an intel officer in the reserves, and it makes me think a little bit about needing to tap into all the different sections of information warfare in order to build yourself a really effective operational picture. I think that's what we have the capability to do here today with this panel, and I'm really excited to kind of get folks different input as we talk about this issue, and particularly how we think about effectively funding and responding to these threats in ways that gives us a good feedback loop. So we're learning from our experiences in the field and making sure we can improve our infrastructure as we make investments in the future. So I'm going to dive right into questions because I think that'll give us the most interesting range of discussion. And I'll start with Joel Doolin, who joins us from FEMA. He was a career naval officer before joining FEMA 9 years ago and serves now as its #2 attorney. His current role is as the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Hazard Mitigation, which I'm very curious to hear about the range of your work there. But let me start with you. You represent this federal agency with this huge role in maintaining resiliency across the economy. What's FEMA's general approach for making our critical infrastructure resilient against the range of hazards that we have on the table in front of us today?
Thank you, and Semper Fortis, Emily. Good morning, everyone, and to the veterans out there, I'm going to answer in the form of a commander's estimate of the situation and poeti. So,
oh God.
Basically, in answer to the question, FEMA, helping people before, during, and after disasters, we're responsible as the lead federal agency for protecting what's about 96,000 nautical miles of U.S. territory, which we have 3.1 million square miles, 345 million people live in that, and they've all got stuff. They have infrastructure, energy, transportation, communications. We'll talk about a lot of those things. They have homes. Right now, the big board in FEMA, we start every day with a operations brief. If you were to do a quick poll as to how many presidential declarations you think we're working right now, it's 124. For Helene alone, there's been 12, and the number may still be growing. So my message to you, since Helene has everybody's attention, is what we do before the next inevitable one matters. And at FEMA, we recommend you use the POETI model. So the P for planning, right? You've got your plans. We'll hear from some of my other colleagues about how they have coordinated in their regions and their spheres of influence to get ready for the next event or potential event. Guidance, which FEMA provides in many things, including cybersecurity and climate awareness. The O is for organization. Some of you may be familiar with the National Incident Management System. It's post 9/11 system that's been around that basically, among the other things it provides, are resource typings so that when Michelle in Tennessee needs a particular type of fire equipment to send to Brandon in Georgia, she knows through our resource typing library, because it's been organized, that it can be sent through a state-to-state exchange. E, I'm cheating there, it would be a G, grants. There are lots of grants, as you heard about in the past panel, but also that FEMA has to make investments, right, pre-landfall, pre-disaster, to mitigate those hazards, defend us, harden those targets, if you will. And then, of course, training and exercises, because level of knowledge about the roles, responsibilities, what you're going to be facing, and testing those capabilities are effect. So, short answer, POETI, Emily.
So I want to move on to Michelle, who I think represents a really important part of this discussion. So Michelle Ray serves as the Vice President of Generation Services for Power Operations with the Tennessee Valley Authority. She's responsible for the coal, gas, and hydro support teams in asset management, engineering, outage, and projects and technical programs. She has 22 years of experience in the utility industry, so a really, really interesting background, giving us how the industry thinks about these critical threats. So I want to pull the thread a little bit on Helene in our recent weather events that obviously impact the power grid. Over the past few years, we've seen extreme heat, extreme cold, and particularly the southern portion of the nation has really been impacted in these recent storms. How does TVA respond to these various weather threats, and what steps are you taking to incorporate or mitigate climate risk in your long-term infrastructure planning?
Thanks, Emily. I appreciate it. And before I get there, I'm just going to talk a little bit about TVA for those that may not know. So TVA is in the southeastern United States. So we are the largest public power company in the U.S. and serve over 10 million customers. And you know, it's a little bit unique. We are a lot of a collaboration with the federal government. We are a federal agency, but we are a nonprofit, and so everything we make and the work that we do is based off of the funding we receive through our power sales. So, you know, I've had a lot of conversations around weather and climate change. We've seen a lot of changes in the winter storms, Helene with the rain, and so from a critical infrastructure standpoint, you know, we're focused on our existing assets as well as how do we prepare for future with our new designs. And so in the past, we had some pretty significant winter storms in December of 22. Elliott affected us significantly. We had to shed load and power. And so we've spent the last year really focused on our natural gas sites. They are built in the southeast, so they're not really built for the extreme weather and the cold weather. So we spent the last year really fortifying those, making sure that those can withstand any of the winter changes that we're seeing quite a little bit more often, right? It's supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime thing, and it feels like they're happening much more than once in a lifetime. So we've spent a lot of time really preparing those gas sites, making sure we're adding wind breaks, we're adding enclosures where need be, putting in some heat trace, but we're also adding in technology, right? And so I think that's a big piece of our solution on the proactive side is how do we leverage technology to put some of that capability in there. And so we have added smart panels. We're monitoring external into our corporate area that we're monitoring all of our gas sites and our coal sites while they're in these extreme weather events, and able to help back up those operators that are out there fighting the cold and the extreme weather at that time. We're also been focusing on, you know, with Helene, we talked a little bit about dam safety. For those that don't know, we have 40,000 miles of river that we manage in TVA. And so a big piece of that is how do we manage the river? How do we manage the flooding? What are we doing to prepare for dam safety and making sure that those dams that we're responsible for are taken care of? And you know, we have re-looked at our calculations from seismic to flooding to make sure that those dams can withstand the changes that we're starting to see. So we've actually raised some of our dams, the elevation of our dams, made them higher. We have a lot of monitoring that we have there as well to let us know if there's movement or if we're seeing head pressure changes. And again, leveraging that technology to be able to allow us to see what's going on at those sites and being a little bit more proactive and not just standing on. We haven't seen these weather changes in the past, but incorporating those into the future state and the calculations that we're running.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So moving on a little bit to the more military-focused perspective here, I want to go to you. This is Brandon Cockrell, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Energy and Sustainability, leads the program on the development and oversight of installation, energy and water security, resilience and conservation, sustainability, operational energy, a huge range of responsibilities. But prior to this role, Mr. Cockrell served as the Deputy to the Garrison Commander at Fort Moore, Georgia, which is the Army's largest training installation. So I actually want to go back to your previous role and ask you a little bit about what does the idea of resiliency, both to, you know, let's narrow it a bit to energy and climate threats. What does that look like for a garrison commander, and how can you respond at that level?
You know, when you're taking and you're leading an installation and you're managing an installation, being able to understand kind of the primary and the core mission of that's critical. Looking across the board that energy is a requirement to do anything. You know, I mean, how many of us woke up this morning, flipped the switch on with your fingers crossed? You know, none of us. So it is something that so many times we don't plan for a lack of energy, for energy to be intermittent. It's something that it's become just a staple. So at an installation level, there are so many critical, key, and important aspects to being able to accomplish the mission. Typically, installations, around 30% of your military live on post. Virtually all of your civilians and your contractors live off post. So if a natural or a man-made disaster affects a region, then the ability to be able to conduct the mission is hampered unless you've planned for that. So the critical piece is looking ahead and trying to find those instances of where do we find the shortfalls, where do we see the shortcomings, how do we get after these? Because, you know, we can fix these problems, but we can't fix these problems quickly. So as long as there's time, and we've got great folks throughout the Army. Today, they're out working all across the world, figuring these hard problems out, and they're doing a phenomenal job. So planning ahead of time, looking, forecasting, setting things in motion is so critical.
Well, and often cooperating with people who are outside of your control,
Yes.
right? So it's outside of the Army's ability to control that civilian population.
Well, and you know, it's not an Army problem. It's a community problem. Because if a natural disaster hits a region, it doesn't make the determination, I'm in a military boundary, so I'm going to stop. Or I'm only on a military installation, so this is all I'm going to affect. So what happens is it becomes a community concern. It becomes a community planning event that we all have to tackle. You know, at an installation, some of the most important people, like let's pick Fort Moore as an example, spent many years there. Some of the most important people to get on the installation are your dining facility workers. I mean, today there are 16,000, 17,000 soldiers in training today. How do they eat? So working through the process, working with the city, but it's not only just the city, because all of your, you know, if you look at your municipality partners that are there, you look at your companies that are in the region as well, you look at your educational opportunities, you look at how you handle childcare, the food distribution systems. So all of that globally that surrounds an installation up to, again, depending on the installation, the distance around, but having all of that synchronized and linked and knowing, you know, they say that you don't want to exchange business cards at the crisis site. So having those ahead of time is so critical moving out.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a good segue to our last panelist. Justin Siberell is the President of Regions and Corporate Affairs at Bechtel, which is one of the U.S.'s leading engineering, construction, and project management companies. He leads Bechtel's government affairs team and joined Bechtel in 2020 after a 27-year career with the U.S. Foreign Service, where he served as the ambassador to Bahrain and managed many counterterrorism and other foreign domestic assignments. I want to kind of build off of this community element. What's the role of construction companies like yours in relation to governments and military bases and operating companies to safeguard this critical infrastructure? And how do you ensure that risk mitigation gets incorporated at the ground level, so before you even start a project?
Great. Thanks very much for the question, and thanks for having us here. Bechtel is very proud to support the Veterans Energy Summit. And for those unfamiliar, Bechtel is an engineering, construction, project management company founded in 1898, headquartered in Reston, Virginia. We operate globally through 5 major business lines: infrastructure, energy, mining and metals, advanced manufacturing, and then nuclear power, security, and environment. We tend to build sort of the big jobs, big construction projects here in the United States and around the world. We're also a very proud employer of veterans through the Helmets to Hard Hats program, as well as targeted recruitment programs that link up with our BServe internal resource group. Our Bechtel's association with U.S. military, of course, goes back decades, principally in the area of defense installations, naval installations, but also naval propulsion. We're also involved on missile defense programs like the Sentinel program. So a very long association with U.S. military, very proud association. So thanks for allowing me to make that plug. Now to your question. I think it's interesting, you know, on this panel we have effectively representatives of owner developers, operators, and then the builders of infrastructure. And for effective infrastructure protection, you really have to have seamless coordination across those three. We assign security managers to our projects at an early stage so that they're there even in the design phase in some cases to ensure that adequate security programs are being stood up, consistent, of course, with the owner's requirements, but also consistent with effective security practices that we've learned through the many generations of projects we've been involved with. And an underappreciated aspect of this is just basic awareness. You know, we have construction workers who come from all across the United States. They might not implicitly understand that they're working on a project that itself is critical to either the nation's economy, economic security, or even its national security. So raising awareness, doing in-briefs for those new employees, making them understand that they're part of a project that may be particularly at risk or vulnerable to a variety of threats is a first order of business. And I should say that, you know, Bechtel works on both government and then non-government private sector construction projects. So we, of course, on our government projects adhere to the security standards and requirements that are implemented. Those are always, you know, very well understood, and we learn from those, however, and translate many of those practices into our private sector work. Many of our projects fit into, you know, the CISA has defined 16 categories of critical infrastructure. We work in about 10 of those. We've become very familiar with federal agency programs to set standards and implement standards. We have effective programs to liaise with local law enforcement on these projects. We need to set into place reporting mechanisms for employees to report either being approached or for suspicious activity that may disrupt or delay a construction project. Cyber threats, of course, are a very major concern, and the contractor security, cybersecurity capability needs to, and the team needs to establish seamless coordination, in particular with the owner and developer and the operator, to ensure that their requirements are built into the project, even at the design phase. The same would go for physical security requirements, where you have camera systems or barrier systems. Those really need to be thought through early in the design phase. And then finally, you know, vetting and monitoring needs to extend to the supply chain. You know, in a large, complex construction project, we might be managing dozens, if not hundreds, of subcontracts. So you really need to also ensure that the subcontractor community, the suppliers, are themselves qualified in some manner, pre-qualified, vetted, so that they're adhering to the security standards that are required to maintain the security of that installation. So coming back to the question, it's really a matter of integration from design, from the owner's perspective, and then making sure that the operator and then the builder are implementing that vision from the beginning.
Great. So I want to double down a little bit on this idea of this integration. I think one of the things I saw when I was on Capitol Hill is that the agencies that manage the mitigation and response effort are not necessarily the same agencies that manage the rebuilding efforts. I think, for example, you know, the relationship between FEMA and the U.S. Army Corps, where the Army Corps is doing all of these building projects, but they don't necessarily have the feedback loop that they need from FEMA or other agencies that do the disaster response. You know, Joel, do you think that there is a need for better coordination between those agencies? And how do we kind of break the logjam between them being, you know, it's siloed in DHS or DOD to better communicate and build off each other?
Great question, Emily. I think, again, the short answer is yes, you can always do better. You know, the good news is when you have a response, as is going in with Helene, you know, statutorily and operationally, right, FEMA can take as lead federal agency and bring those partners together. The challenge is doing that beforehand, where sometimes you don't even know who your partners are. And so since we are talking about, you know, critical infrastructure, Justin mentioned he's got 16 type categories for critical infrastructure. Well, we only work in 8 different lifelines for some of that same critical infrastructure. I'm not even going to ask Brandon how many there are at DOD, but those are kind of the conversations that we want to be, you know, starting ahead of time. And I would say if I had to single out one thing that I would want to eliminate the gaps and seams on beforehand, it would be cyber. Now you would think, okay, why not the natural disasters? We've actually gotten pretty good about being able to predict and provide the alerts and warnings, but you don't know when that cyber attack is coming, right? That's even easier for the bad guys, where it takes so little to disrupt a critical piece of infrastructure. Sun Tzu once wrote, when you are far, appear as if you are near. Now he would have written with cyber in mind, while you are far, attack near, because you can do it cyber to any of our infrastructure. So we do need to double down on that one, Emily.
Yeah, from my time on Capitol Hill, even arguing about who the sector-specific lead should be in the event of a cyber attack was a major issue. It took us forever to move any legislation on that because everybody wanted to protect their jurisdiction. And the problem is cyber doesn't care, and the attack format is the same regardless of whether it's a grid project or another piece of critical infrastructure. But maybe to follow on the cyber issue, Michelle, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about what TVA has done to build cyber resiliency within your portfolio, and what do you think the missing pieces are? Is this sort of, as an intermediary between the private sector and the federal government, how do we help to better improve the technologies that are available to you?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of work in the cyberspace. I think it's a unique area. So, there's a piece of separating kind of our business architecture to the operational architecture, making sure that we keep the sites that we're running separate from our business network. And so that separation and having those barriers, those physical and firewall barriers, has been important. We're also very focused right now. We're building a new system operations center. So we talk about interconnection in the grid. Building a new operations center that is much more secure physically, so many barriers. You talked a little bit about how do you build in those barriers from the beginning, but then also from a cyber standpoint, how do we create that system? So that system is responsible for running all of our transmission system in the grid, and so making sure that that's very separate and taken care of. And so the cyber continues, right? There's a lot of exercises we run. We run a lot of drills with partners and FEMA and partners across the U.S., right, to practice those drills and those cyber drills. And you think about communications, and we had, even with the flood, we lost communications in some of our areas. And so how do you manage to run systems when you don't have communication, satellite phones and things like that? And so the cyber, I think, is one of the biggest things. I think you can prepare as much as you can, but you don't see it coming like you see a storm coming, right? And so I think that the separation, a lot of the play and the preparation, working with partners, being very aware of what new things are coming our way. I think there's been a lot of conversation in the industry, not even just from cyber attacks, but how do you pull in and leverage some of the new technology? And so we're talking about ChatGPT and what does AI look like, and how do you mitigate the use of that information and that technology, but also not put your system at risk by introducing something that doesn't have a lot of the security built in around it. And so I think that's the piece of, as an industry, the utility industry can be a little slow in technology space, right? And so there's benefits there. We have a lot of barriers, but also how do you incorporate that technology in a very safe way, in a cyber-safe way, right, is a lot of the conversation going on in the industry.
Do you work with the DOE National Labs at all in helping to figure out what technology might be better suited for your particular challenges?
So we do work with a lot of different labs and industry groups. We work with EPRI, we work with DOE, we work with the ORL, RNL labs, looking at different options. And so, so we are working, right, as an industry. I think a lot of us are actually working together, trying to understand what technologies are out there. There's a lot of similarities between all the different, federal government agencies and TVA. And so we do share a lot of information back and forth, and what can we do to help secure us there.
Justin, maybe you can give us some examples of technologies that you all are incorporating or moving forward. But I'd also love to pick your brain a bit on how this issue can be perhaps looked at through the foreign policy lens with your background in diplomacy. Is there an opportunity for us to do technology sharing or help develop systems that better support our partners overseas from these cyber threats?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one thing I'd also like to just address is the way in which our definition of what becomes a sort of critical piece of energy infrastructure has evolved and is evolving based on emerging threats globally. particularly with the importance that governments are attaching, including our own, to onshoring critical manufacturing, for instance, of semiconductors or of supporting the AI backbone, high-tech backbone. This becomes a critical piece of our economy and therefore needs to be defended just like any other piece of infrastructure in a way. So, as I mentioned before, CISA, or CISA, has defined 16 categories of critical infrastructure. Bechtel works in about 10 of those, things like LNG export facilities, nuclear power plants, of course, or defense industrial projects, transport projects, and that advanced manufacturing, as I noted. We have a project currently with Intel in Ohio, which is the new semiconductor fab there. And it's the facility itself, but it's also the power station that supports the facility. It's the AI data center plus the power that goes along with the data center. So we have to, if we look at examples, the most obvious one being Ukraine currently, where the Russian attacks have persistently targeted energy infrastructure, both as a way to cause hardship and harm to the Ukrainian people, but also to knock out the economy. So we need to learn from those experiences. We also need to understand and learn from threats like to the Colonial Pipeline a few years ago, the cyber threat that shut down the pipeline network. I mean, these are the kinds of things that we have to become resilient against. As for the technologies, Bechtel set up over 2 decades ago a cyber lab, which effectively became our own cybersecurity sort of center of excellence. And we use that and we drill against emerging threats around the world, and so that we can apply these practices in our own work. We have our own proprietary data, of course, and we need to protect, but also we need to work closely with our customers to ensure that their systems and data is well protected. There's obviously a desire to bring AI into the construction industry, particularly mega projects, because of concerns about allegations or people believing that there's poor planning on the front end, and therefore you have ballooning costs at the end. So can you use AI to apply against the early planning process? And we're certainly, we believe that we can, and we're looking at that, building AI models, because again, you have to protect your own proprietary data. So there are really interesting innovations coming, I think, to our line of work that will also help in the protection of critical infrastructure. As for the diplomatic side, I think it is really it's an important question. When I was in the State Department, at one point I was the acting coordinator for counterterrorism, and this critical infrastructure protection in particular, which the expertise resides within the Department of Homeland Security and the U.S. government. We worked very closely with DHS and the State Department to liaise with other governments to ensure that we were collaborating on best practices. In particular, this was sort of the post-9/11 era, and the concern was against non-state actors. But today we're seeing state actors, state-backed actors, that are threatening our critical infrastructure. And so therefore, in no time like the present, really, to harden our own critical infrastructure. You think of experiences like the Baltic states have gone through with Russia for at least 10 years of addressing persistent cyber threats. As I mentioned, Ukraine, we have got these threats all around the world that we need to basically build a community of common interest and use our diplomacy and to build resilience on a global basis. So thanks for the question. It's an important aspect, really, of our resiliency.
Absolutely. Taking it back home a bit, we talked about this before, but October is the Army's Energy Action Month. And this year's theme is, quote, powering the mission. Can you give us some examples of initiatives the Army is implementing to ensure they can continue to fight the wars we need to fight in the environments we face?
Absolutely, because, we all can raise our hand and make the statement that the world is not as it was a decade ago. So installations are no longer a sanctuary. Near peer actors can reach installations. And that is a reality. So that being the case, how do we plan? It's not, on our side, it's not if something's going to happen. We have to plan as if it will happen. So we are really focusing our efforts on kind of 3 pillars: what's going on the resilient side, what's going on the transformative side, as well as kind of the innovative piece. So as an example, with executive orders, and we are making a big push with, some different strategies and different directives that have been put in place, is for every installation to have a microgrid, which allows the generation and the distribution of power as needed on that installation. 31 of our installations already have those. We have dozens already in design and under construction. So we're pushing hard on those. We are trying and looking at new innovative technologies across the board. We have a project now at one installation that we're installing a flow battery, testing its capacity. We're also testing a new technology that it's called a food to fuel, to where it's a digester that takes a lot of the food and generates biogas out the other side, and how do we turn it into power? We're taking and we're pressing the mark as hard as we can in these areas, because we know power is a requirement. We're also testing our installations. We have projects across the installations called black start exercises, to where we stop the energy coming on the installation and then see what occurs. So now, again, this is not a surprise. You come in one day and your power's off. It takes a little bit of planning. So, as a matter of fact, we have recently completed one, and during the black start exercise, there was, unbeknownst to us, there was a real world continental U.S. redeployment that occurred at that power projection platform the same day that the black start exercise occurred, and during our AAR at the end is when we were notified that the redeployment happened and it was seamless. And that's exactly what we need, is if the main power from external to the installations are shut off, how does an installation become an island? How does it provide the power that it needs to be able to maintain and conduct its mission, and to provide the quality of life services for all the soldiers and families?
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to move to a couple of these questions. I have one more for everybody before we close, but I'm going to move to a couple of our audience questions so that we can make sure we have time to get to them. Let's see. We have one here. There are more than 340 substations that were entirely submerged by Hurricane Helene. What's FEMA's role in the infrastructure restoration? I think that one is going to you, Joel.
It would appear. So thank you. So energy is one of the lifelines. Prior to landfall, this gets in right, we're before, during, and after. So the during counts as pre-landfall. FEMA was able to stage, and working with the state partners, people to respond, including there are, and I know that Michelle is well familiar with this, arrangements between the different states and the private companies, for power restoration teams to help each other. So in FEMA, we're supporting those local efforts where it is managed and executed. But to put a fine point on it, I don't know how many people are in the field today restoring power. We're about day 5 into the disaster, and there are 3 of the 6 affected states that would still be red in the energy sector. But I do know that there are thousands of federal agency responders in the field. About a quarter come from FEMA, and several more, many times that, from private sector, obviously, right, to work some of that power restoration. And since this is a veterans group, the National Guard is the governor's go-to source. So a lot of times when you see FEMA called on the playing field for response, there's a National Guard unit that is there. And I know in some cases they have gotten into power restoration, but I don't think that's a specialty with them. But they can do a lot of jobs.
I'll just jump in, right?
Yeah.
So there is a lot of agreements between the power companies. So I know TVA sent a lot of crews out there. They stage them ahead of time. And I think the other thing they're doing to prepare, right, utilities and companies are preparing, we're also looking at having more spares, right? The supply chain, I know that was a previous topic on one of the previous panels, is taking us a lot longer to have to receive equipment, right? And so the supply chain side of being a little bit more prepared, having more spares on site and available so we can have much faster restoration when these items occur.
And I didn't mean to leave out the Army Corps of Engineers as an oversight of my part. Key partner in
This is what I was talking about before, right? Like FEMA and the Army Corps, we're supposed to work a little bit better together. This is a similar question, but how much planning is going into our response time in more rural areas, particularly in the Arctic, where we see these long response times, but often you can have significant extreme weather threats. Maybe this is a question for you, Brandon, in terms of how the Army thinks about these more remote rural installations. What's the planning that's going into that? How are you cooperating with partners on the outside?
And see, it all goes back to that premise that every installation must be an island. So all the efforts put in place to where we can be self-sustainable is critical. But now, that's nice. But again, having the conversation earlier with so many of our soldiers and all of our civilians and contractors live off an installation. It's how do we, as not just an installation, be able to plan, prepare, provide power, but how do we do it regionally? Because again, being able to take what we're good at and being able to affect, because every single person that comes on an installation to provide a mission has a family. So it's, do we get to the point where we bring the person on the installation to provide the mission, or do we bring the family on the installation to do the mission? So those are the type planning things that we continue to look at and work into the future, is how do we regionally ensure this happens regardless of the weather events that happen?
Joel, do you have anything to add there? I'm thinking a little bit, like this is not in the Arctic, but last year when we were seeing FEMA's response to the Maui wildfires, getting the right equipment and the ability to give people housing and support immediately following those fires was a real challenge. How does FEMA address this? We need to be able to respond in a quick time frame when we have to get really far away with our equipment.
Right, so if the disaster or incident is in an actual island, that is even harder problem than the ones that Brandon's been discussing. I would have to say that the only thing that you can do is to prepare ahead of time. So we have focused on Helene. You also have a Western, Pacific area of responsibility, and we have territories that are even further distant than Hawaii. And so some of you may remember it was the first day of the Western Pacific typhoon season, and you had the storm go up and it hit Guam, which is a very important place to Brandon and anybody having to do it. So the only way around that, Emily, is to have the foresight to anticipate and have plans in place for how you would respond if it would happen. Set up your operations so that you've got the warning and the tracking, and then we pre-positioned as what we could. But there is that tyranny of geography, and it is not going to be easy.
So this isn't one of my highlighted questions, so I'm going to just preface that. If you don't want to answer, you don't have to. But I think it's an important thing to talk about. Integration is great, but who's paying for it, particularly at the local level? I think that's something we often forget in rooms full of really smart people like this, where we think, well, obviously this is how we solve the problem, so the Congress is going to write us a check and we'll be able to get this done, no problem. How do we deal with that balance of costs and resources, and how do we better make the pitch perhaps to lawmakers about the priority of thinking about this on the front end rather than on the back end? Maybe I'll just go down the line on this one.
All right, I'll initiate. And again, I think what has to happen is there has to be the recognition of need. If we as an Army installation in a community says we have to have 14 days of power, okay, so that's a nice setup, but it's mildly interesting to your chambers of commerce. But when we start looking at how do we regionally approach this, and we realize it's not a single entity problem, it's a regional problem. It's not a single entity plan, it's a regional plan. It's a regional sustainability aspect. Then your .govs, your .civs, your .mils, your .coms, all the ones come into play, and they come into bear because they all have their own equities. There's things that they can, your .coms can come to the table, but there's things that they can't, disclose because of shareholder interest as well. And there's things that we can't disclose either. But the end state goal would be recovery. So planning to either completely eliminate, but there's some things we can't, but then a quick plan with authorities in place, knowing exactly what those are, so the recovery goes quickly.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think, we were talking earlier today, right? The energy transition also plays a piece into this infrastructure as we're transitioning. In some of the previous panels, I think we all have a common interest in this, right? I think it's not a single entity's problem to solve, and so we're seeing more of that collaboration. Small modular reactors, I think, was discussed in a previous panel. So how are we working and partnering together to look at SMRs and solving this energy transition problem that we have? So I think that's the piece of it. It really is a much larger solution that we have to come to. It's not an individual entity's problem to solve. And so I think we're starting to see a lot more collaboration across agencies to look for those solutions.
I think there is, completely agree, I think there is a recognition along every level of government and private sector, nonprofit, the whole community, that this is a team sport. The issue that I think is even more critical is there's a lack of capacity at that local level. So we're used to interacting with that emergency manager for the jurisdiction. If it's a small jurisdiction, that may be just one heartbeat that has to handle all of the threats and hazards that we have talked about in this short time, and they may not even have that as a full-time job. Another shortage, you've got over 30,000 jurisdictions in our country. A lot of them depend on volunteer fire departments, meaning they don't have the funding base to pay for that essential service. We have a grant program that can help with some of that, but there's always unmet need there. So get your metrics, count what's not being done, and partner up as you can.
Yeah, I mean, part of your question was about funding, and sometimes on these sort of large-scale projects, an owner will be sort of inclined to carve up a project into many different pieces, with the idea that maybe that's a more cost-effective way of doing a project. And what you end up doing is creating seams between, an early concept plan and then a designer and an engineer and then the company that comes in ultimately to build something. As Bechtel, we like to be involved as early as possible, ideally together with the developer as they're thinking about a project so that we can be in on the even conceptual stage. We can help them think through the feasibility studies, the environmental impact assessments, and then really kind of cost out, in truth, what this project is going to entail and cost. Some don't like to be told that, so it's really a trust issue. And what you want is absolute trust between the owner developer and those that are working with them to be truthful about the true cost. Because if you don't get it right at the beginning and then you have to retrofit or you're ill prepared for what we've been talking about, whether it's natural disasters or cyber attacks or other types of threats, then that's going to cost you a lot more in the long run. So, I mean, our answer to that would be early contractor involvement as early as possible and think through the entirety of the project from beginning to end.
Great. So I'm going to do one more round robin question before we close. The goal of this summit here is to sort of examine the role of the energy sector in bridging this military-civilian transition for veterans, and sort of bringing together these two communities that have really complementary goals and experiences, and we can really build on each other. So what are each of you in your respective roles doing to help bring in veterans into your agencies or to help them transition to the private sector?
Okay. Everyone today that wears a green suit one day will wear one of these suits. So there is the eventual retirement date that happens. And the beauty is we have individuals that today, tomorrow, the next day, will be exchanging, their military uniform for a civilian uniform. You've got individuals that have 20 to 30 years of proven leadership experience that understand how to lead. They started leading 19, 20-year-old small groups all the way up to big multi-million-dollar decisions. So there is a program that the Army has called Soldier for Life. And if anyone is ever interested in, hey, how do I hire a veteran? Contact your local installation and find Soldier for Life. There's entities across the U.S. that are already partnering in the industry, in the energy industry, in the emerging energy industry as well, that they are working the Soldier for Life process that in 10 to 12 weeks while the soldier's still on duty, they get trained, and then when they retire, they're hireable, and they have a skill set, and they're certified. So.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I agree. The veteran population is very important to us at TVA and to our success. We've got about a 17% employee rate that are veterans. Very strong in veteran resource group. We partner, I think you had talked about the hard hats, or helmets to hard hats. So we partner with helmets to hard hats in the transition. And we see it through the hiring and leadership, through the leadership ranks. And then also, I think there's, as we continue to build in this industry and we're seeing a bigger gap in skilled workforce, right? That's a strong area for us as well, to be able to bring in some of those veterans into the skilled workforce and to retrain them and bring them in through that way.
Approximately 15% of FEMA are veterans of one of the armed services, and you can find about our opportunities from usajobs.com. But if I may, I'll just give 3 things that I learned in my transition that anybody who is in uniform trying to transition. 1, it's going to take a lot longer than you think. About a part-time level, people know, about a part-time level of effort for about 18 months. So you start now. 2, while you have developed those skills that Brandon talked about, and they are valuable, as Michelle has also validated, you are speaking a foreign language. You are coming from a different culture. The burden of persuasion will be on you through your resume, through your interview skills, to tell that employer how what you did in one of our armed services will help them, and what type of role you'd be able to flourish in. And then 3rd and finally, that's a team sport as well. So you've got to network. You would be amazed with how many people, because you are on active duty or in the reserves, will give you 15 minutes in what's called an information interview to say, hey, Emily, you're doing cool stuff. Would you talk with me for 15 minutes about how you got to do that? The only ground rule is I can't ask her to hire me, and she understands that. So those would be my 3 takeaways for every veteran looking to transition. Come to FEMA. We're great.
That's excellent advice, by the way. I guess I'd like to focus on, we have in America, and Michelle alluded to it, we have it's approaching the level of crisis in terms of workforce shortage, and particularly for the very ambitious programs we have to build out our electricity grid, major new power installations to power AI, to build and staff the kind of things we're doing, like semiconductor fab construction in Ohio, and of course there's major projects in Arizona. All of these major projects are looking for the skilled building trades. So the first side of it is, there are tremendous opportunities in the construction industry, and we're working with and talking to other companies about this and seeing how we can try to encourage people to look at the building trades as a very very good career. It's a kind of career that you could build a life around and really go places with and earn well in our economy. The other side, of course, is what Brendan said, leadership. I mean, the U.S. military produces the world's best leaders, and we have projects where we need leadership. We need leadership to run a 4,000 person workforce, run a project team. And it's the skills that people learn through the military that I think are very much translatable into an industry like ours. So again, we do participate in the programs like helmets to hard hats. We also have our own recruitment programs, and we're always looking for very capable people. And I would take the advice that was just given. I mean, those are very an excellent way to start networking and get into an industry like ours. Thank you.
Well, with that, unfortunately, we have to close. I think we probably could talk about this topic for the rest of the day. So thank you, everybody. And I think the next thing on the agenda is lunch. So thank you so much for your time.